Hi, I'm Zara Altair, and this is Mystery Monday, where we chat about mystery writing and everything that goes into creating a mystery. So, welcome. Today, I wanted to talk about something that doesn't have so much to do with your creative self as with getting your manuscript ready to distribute, and that is editing. So today I thought we'd take a look at the big picture, and it's the first step that you take when you go into polishing your manuscript. And that is the big picture, the content edit. Um, and you kind of change hats from creative person to logical editor. And as wonderful as your story is, there's always ways you can make it better. So your aim in going through this, a lot of work, it's serious work, is to make your manuscript as professional as possible. I recommend that you go through editing steps before you send your manuscript to an editor, because there's many things that you can find for yourself in your manuscript to polish it up. So you're going to be going through your story at least 3 times, and the first pass is editing on the story elements themselves. And there'll be enough time for details like punctuation and spelling and grammar after you make those changes. The story editing is called content editing or development edit. It doesn't matter what it's called. This is the process. It looks at your story structure and character arcs, at dialogue and scene sequence. And what you want to do is keep asking yourself, does this work in the story? Because the story is what the readers are going to resonate with. You don't want anything that sticks out and takes that reader out of the story. So that's what your goal is in this first big edit. So I recommend printing out your manuscript with lots of white space. So make sure it's double spaced and wide margins, and read it through, reading, and make your marks on that piece of paper as you go through your story. If you go through, because you're going to, if you use something like WordPress or Google Docs, you're going to track the changes later as you enter them, because you get to make another decision about whether you really want to make that change or not. So that this takes a lot of thinking about your story and what's going on and how readers are going to respond and whether everything works together. Your scenes, your dialogue, everything that's going. Some authors use different colors for different editorial changes. This is completely up to you. So, red for grammar and spelling, blue for the character arc, green for the plot, move a scene, it's purple, whatever. That involves having a lot of pens or markers ready as you're going through. That's why I really recommend starting out by printing out your manuscript, because you're just going to mark it all up. If this is your first time with a content edit, just pick a contrast color like red or blue and start reading your story. You can refine your system later as you get accustomed to editing because it's a huge process. All right. So here are some questions to ask as you're reading along. You're going to be scrutinizing your story. So if you find smaller issues like grammar or spelling, mark them because you're going to deal with those later. But don't go in and change your manuscript yet because you're going to be making some big editorial changes and they may just disappear as you make those changes. So don't worry about those little tiny things yet. Just mark them as you go along. What you're looking for is ways to make your story as crisp and smooth as possible. So the very first thing is your first page. Does it hook you? Does it plunge you into the story? Modern readers want to get into the story really fast. So a lot of description, a lot of detail about your protagonist, what they're wearing, how tall they are. Your readers don't really care at that first page or first couple of pages. What they want is they want something happening, and they want to get into the story. And then the other thing is you want to look at the tone and does it reflect your genre? In this case, mystery, but there are a lot of subgenres. So if it's crime, or is it traditional, or is it cozy, you want to make that tone reflect your genre. And then the other thing is, does your protagonist, do their words and their actions introduce his or her character? So you're taking a really hard look at that first page, and a lot of writers wait till the very end of their story to write the first page and to really hone in on it because it's so important. It's just so important. It's the very first thing that your readers see. It's just so important. If you lose them on your first page, they're gone. So then you want to take a look at pacing as you continue reading, and notice chapters in a scene that seem too long or that rush the story and I'm just like, wait, what just happened? And then really important is, does a scene move the story forward? You really need to look at each scene and make sure that that's happening. Sometimes there could be a scene that, is a best example of your writing or is a lot of detail about a character in your story, but if it isn't moving the story forward, you need to take it out. It's like those outtakes that you see in films, the things they took out because they weren't quite on spot enough as far as the entire story goes. So you're going to be looking at that as well. And the other thing is, if you need an element from the scene, think about where you can include it in a different scene. So if you decide that it's not moving the story forward, but there's something in there that really needs to be in your story, you can look at other places in the story to add that particular detail. You're really combing through your story and looking at everything that has to do with getting your story clear for the reader and moving them along in the story. You don't want to leave them behind. You don't want them scratching their head about what does that mean or why did he do that. So you're just looking at all the story elements that make that read a nice smooth read and draw your reader into your mystery. So does your story have a 3-act structure? Or a 4-act, depending on how you're working. Some people break the middle into 2 parts, before the midpoint and after the midpoint. But be sure that you have a clear structure to your story. And is your protagonist confused or thwarted in the first part of Act 2? Does she take the reins after the midpoint? After the midpoint, your detective, your sleuth, your protagonist is there's no time for There's no time for somebody else making a decision. This is when your protagonist takes the reins and moves the story forward. Um, and once the story reaches a climax, does it take too long to wind down? That's another thing. It's like, okay, figured it out, everything's done. Make sure that your your ending after the big climax is short. I don't know what else to say it. We don't need a whole bunch of stuff after your detective has solved the mystery. As far as the reader is concerned, you can tie up a couple of loose ends, but get the story finished. Another thing to check is, do two characters have names that start with the same letter? Um, this can be confusing for readers. If there's a Riley and a Ryan, one of those has to change their name, and that's easy to fix with a simple search and replace. So, also another thing that can happen is your story can feel, overpopulated. There's just too many characters, and it's really hard for a reader to remember who is who and what is what. So, if you're finding that you have in a mystery anything more than, say, 8 suspects, you want to take a look at those and narrow them down. You can probably combine the characteristics of two of those characters into one so that your reader has some clear choices about who the suspects are. You don't want too many, it's confusing. So, and then also with your subplots, it could be a love interest for your protagonist, or something that's happening with their buddy or companion, or it could be, an opponent, not the villain, not the person who actually committed the murder, but some opponent in their life that keeps thwarting what they're trying to do. Um, so you want to make sure that those subplots really integrate into the story and are spaced throughout the story, so they don't clump up together, but you want to space those throughout the story. So this is the time when you can move scenes and chapters around. Um, and then also for a lot of writers, they leave the research till this stage. So if you need to know a street name or an intersection or the name of a beach or the name of a building, this is the time to make sure that you have all those details covered. And then another thing about dialogue, does each character speak in a recognizable voice? So it's really clear to your readers that this is the person that's speaking. Um, and then also you want to check your dialogue for subtext rather than always being on point. You want to make it a little more interesting for your readers. You don't have to spell everything out. Especially something we know as mystery writers is there's a lot of hidden secrets. So it's perfectly okay to add as much subtext as you like. Always good stuff for dialogue. So is the point of view consistent throughout? Do you all of a sudden go into a different character's head and your reader is like, wait, I thought I was following the protagonist and now we're in the head of his best buddy. So you want to make sure that the point of view in your story is consistent, and that each scene, if you do change points of view in your story and have multiple points of view, that each scene is told from only one point of view. So it's okay to have multiple points of view. It's a challenge, but you want to make sure that within each scene it's told from only one point of view. And So those are some tips about looking at content editing, and it's a long process. It is. It takes a lot of thinking. Um, I also suggest that you wait at least a week, if not a month, before you go into this process of content editing. You kind of put the story aside, so by the time you get there, um, you're going to have some fresh eyes on your story. So, and also that you give enough time to your content editing. It's really a lot of thinking and thinking about your story. So plan to spend at least a week going through your story, looking at every way you can tighten your story to give your reader the best experience in your genre. And then there are editing steps after this. So before you go to the next stage of editing, go in and do all the changes that you've done in your content editing. So rewrite your story, making the changes, um, and take as long as necessary to make your changes. This is a huge step in really polishing your mind. I'm sorry, polishing polishing your manuscript and making it the best it can be for your readers. Um, and remember that you are doing the hard work of becoming a professional writer. So be sure to get in touch with me about any questions you have about content editing. It's a really huge job. For those of you who are joining now, I'm Zara Altair, and this is Mystery Monday, where we talk about writing mysteries. Okay, so I have some questions for today. Let's see what I have here. Oh, okay, I'm having trouble keeping track of the 15 suspects in my story. Any tips? All right, we just talked about that a couple of minutes ago. So 15 is just too many. Um, no wonder you're having trouble. So narrow it. No, I can't talk. Narrow it down to 5 to 8 maximum suspects. And then, as I mentioned before, combine some of those 15 so you get it down. If there's a trait that you really love in one of those suspects, but they're kind of tangential to the story, take that trait and give it to a different character. It's going to give that character more depth, and it's going to make your story less confusing. Um, eh, let's see. And then after you've narrowed it down from 15 to, say, 6, okay, I just picked a number, from 15 to 6, um, make sure that you write down the secrets those suspects have and the lies that they tell, because this is an important part of enriching your story and getting the readers involved and getting the readers to really think, man, you know, is she the one who did it? Because that's what we're trying to get. Where our That's where we're trying to lead our readers. So even if they aren't the ultimate villain, you want to make those suspects. You know, so your reader really thinks of them like that. Okay, great question. Let's see what we have here. Um, I've decided my villain has changed as I'm writing my story. What do I do to fix it? Well, it happens, and this happened to me actually. I changed the killer in one of my mysteries when I was about halfway through the story, and I just went, this 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 person is just a much better. The story makes more logical sense if this person is the villain. So it's totally okay to change your mind. Nothing is cast in stone. Um, but then you've got a little work to do when you make the change. You need to go back and check your clues so that your hidden clues are pointing to this new villain. It really not that hard. You may have a little bit of rewriting to do to focus and hide your new killer. So but you want to keep them, you know, one of many suspects as far as the reader is concerned. So you may want to do a little fine tuning with your new villain. Um, but the thing is, and this is something you have to remember when you're, trying to make decisions like this, is your final readers won't know you changed the ultimate villain. That's that's it. That's, how it goes. So, and be glad you made the decision now. Uh, while you're in the writing stage, that's where we get to change things and fix things. So here's something along the same vein, but a little bit different. I can't decide who to make the final villain. Is it a family member or an outside person? I've finished writing over half the story, but can't decide. That's along the same lines, but a little bit different. So, it's a little late now if you're halfway through, but planning your mystery is a great help. It's just a great help, especially for new writers. It can save you from dilemmas like this and the subsequent rewriting. So, since you're already more than halfway into your story, there's several places you can look to help you decide. If you have several people and you can't decide which is the one, and how your story is going to end. Um, so you can go all the way back to your one sentence description that I hope you wrote right at the beginning, and take a look at that. And what is the focus of that one sentence description? That may be a clue right away to you as to who you want to choose as the killer in your mystery. Um, Another way to look is in the tone of your story. Is it a friendly mystery focused on interpersonal relations? Then you probably want to go for a family member, because these interpersonal relationships are important. Um, and then another way to look at it is through your subplots. Look at which subplots carry the most weight in your story as it stands now, and you may find that one of those subplots leads you to your final decision about who the villain is going to be. Is it an outside influence, or is it a member of the family? Um, and then going back to the beginning again and thinking about your story, look at the theme. Go back. What is the story focus? The way you originally conceived it. I know you're thinking about making changes now, but what was your original goal? And that should be the goal also of the protagonist. And that may help you decide in the obstacles that your detective has as they're trying to solve the mystery. What are the things that cause the most problems, and who is doing that? And how does your protagonist deal with the world is another way to look at it, so that once again you're going back to, is it a focus on interpersonal relation, or is it a focus on a bigger picture with a problem to solve, in which case it may be someone outside the family. So you really, at this point, if you're confused about who to choose as the villain, really hone in on what is this story about. And I think that'll help you a lot in making your final decision. And then one other suggestion I have for trying to decide is to do a little outside work and write alternate endings. Write an ending with the family member of your choice, as the perpetrator of the murder and write an ending with an outsider as the perpetrator of the murder, and see how you feel about each of those endings. That can probably help you a lot with how you're going to get your readers to that final point. Okay, let's see. I think that's all the questions for today. So we're just about done. And then one thing, I have an announcement, and that is that I have a new course, Write a Killer Mystery, for new writers, and we talk through a lot of these issues in the course. So I'd love to have you join me. It's half off right now, and I'll leave links in the show notes for today. And I thank you so much once again for being here, and I will see you next Monday.